reminder worth spreading is that nothing is impossible if you have big dreams. It was Nelson Mandela who said, "It seems impossible until it is done." But then how does one move from something seemingly impossible and turn that into a reality? For me, the word dreams comes to mind. Dreams, vision, purpose, and passion. I've always walked barefoot from a young child through the African bush, and I felt the earth under my feet, this red earth of Africa. And I was very fortunate to attend a wilderness leadership course at the tender age of 16. That was in 1974. I think some of you weren't even thought about then. And that event changed my life profoundly. The young ranger, a gentleman by the name of Colin Johnson, he gave us our lunch ration sitting underneath this acacia tree in the hot Zululand sunshine. And he said, "Chaps, before you crack the egg that was part of the lunch ration, before you crack it and eat it, pretend for a moment it's this finite planet, our only home, Mother Earth. If the egg is the planet, then what part of that planet would be the shell, the atmosphere?" And we all said the shell. And he said no, and he cracked it on his pip, and he peeled that shell away, and as you know, I'm sure you've seen it, there's a fine membrane underneath that shell. And he said, "This is how fragile our planet is." And then he said something else, and this was a tipping point for me. He said, "What are you going to do when you get back to school to be an asset to this planet? Not one day when you retire or you find this elusive thing called time, now." That was a long time ago. And I got back home, and my dad shared a story with me. This beautiful lagoon system up on the west coast, north of Cape Town, was under siege. They were going to be building a solid concrete structure, a huge monolith of a jetty in that lagoon at the town called Saldanha Bay. And I would have none of this. Why? WESA, the Wildlife and Environmental Society of South Africa, were up in arms. They were at war. They said, if that concrete wall was built, we would have the current changing in that lagoon system, which would potentially drive certain floral and faunal species to extinction. And I was horrified. This, for me, was like a microcosm of our planet. And I went to my dad, and I said, "Dad, I want to save Langabond Lagoon." My dad said, "Well, what do you want to do?" I said, "We need to raise 15,000 rand. The first thing my dad said is, "Don't look at me." But I said, "Dad, a lot of people with small amounts can make that money." And I said, "I want to run a long distance. And all of my schoolmates, they're going to dig into their pockets, they're going to put their pocket money in the hat, and all of these little amounts are going to make the 15,000. Because WESA needed to have an environmental impact assessment conducted in that lagoon system, which was going to take 1 year. So my dad said, "Fantastic idea, my boy. You've always had big dreams. Where do you want to run from?" And I said, "Well, my friend James, his parents have got a home in Plettenberg Bay, so we're going to run from Plet to Cape Town in the September school holidays, 1975. I just turned 17. And then my dad said, "Fantastic idea. Do you know how far Plet is from Cape Town?" And I said, "I've got no idea." And then he said, we calculated 532 kilometers, which I had to be able to run in 11 days. And that's when my dream became the nightmare. Because here's the reality. I'm an ordinary guy. I really am. The difference from ordinary to extraordinary is that word extra. And I'd never run more than 8 kilometers in the compulsory school cross-country. I hated it, and I was kind of middle of the field to back. But here's the trick, ladies and gentlemen. If you have big dreams, and you're driven by a purpose beyond just the ego, you can achieve incredible things. And I ran from Plet to Cape Town in those 11 days, in extreme pain, but no pain, no gain. And we raised the money, and if you go to Saldanha today and you look at that jetty, it is there, but it's built in a particular fashion to allow unobstructed current flow to move through that lagoon. I dreamt then, big dreams, and it showed me that nothing is impossible. But then my life changed, and as I grew up, and the real experiences of life, as people call them, the knocks, the blows, I became obsessed with one thing, and that was making money. I wanted to be successful businessman. And I forgot about that amazing law in nature. And it goes something like this. Every species on this planet gives to one or more other species. And in that giving, it sustains the giver. Honeybee and the flower. Sea anemone and the clownfish. We tend to come from the premise of, hey, what's in it for me before I do anything? And I did really well financially. I was successful financially. But I wasn't significant, and that's the difference. In 1983, I'd made a lot of money. I'd had a paid-for home. I had 2 cars, etc. And I basically lost the plot, and I lost my business. I was declared insolvent, bankrupt. I lost everything. Not only did I lose the materialistic trappings of my life, my father had suffered his second stroke. I was the eldest of 5 children. He was living with me. And what happened is I had to take my father, because I didn't have a home, and I had to put him into a frail care center. I had to bath my father, and I had to take my father to the toilet. His dignity was wrecked. He died 2 weeks after I put him in that frail care center. My fiancée left me 2 weeks after that. And a short while after that, I took myself to this beautiful place called the Cederberg. And I went there for one reason. My ego was non-existent. I went there to kill myself. I went there to die. And I'll never forget this as long as I live. The last day of my life, that night I lay under this blaze of African stars. And I thought to myself, I am so insignificant. I am so small. I am nothing. And I wept, unashamedly. And I remember making one of the hardest decisions of my entire life, to have the courage to live. And I went home to live. And I embraced with every ounce of my being giving. And I'm saying this emphatically, ladies and gentlemen, the greatest gift any human being has on this planet is the gift of giving. And when we as a species make that paradigm shift, we change our destiny. And indeed, the destiny of this planet and all its biodiversity. The more I gave, the more I got. Now, whether you're religious, agnostic, atheist, or spiritual, I respect who you are and I respect your views. But it's also a scientific and natural principle. The more you give, the more you get. And I can promise you this, I'm living proof of that. When David Grier, my friend and running partner, approached me, he said, Braam, let's do something that's never, ever been done. Let's run the entire length of the Great Wall of China. I scratched my head. I said, what the hell for? It is seriously far. In fact, 4,218 kilometers. It had never been done in a single attempt. And essentially, we had to run a marathon a day for just under 100 days, on average. The Great Wall of China, 4,218 Ks. The ascents, the uphills back to back, equal the height of Mount Everest 14.8 times. It is a formidable task. It's known as the sleeping dragon. I'd lost all my toenails in the first 3 weeks. It took me half an hour every day to bandage my feet. But I kept going. Why did I keep going? Because I had a purpose beyond my ego. I said to David, I'm not doing this unless we benefit the lives of others. To show, children that nothing is impossible if they have big dreams, and I hope you're all being like kids this afternoon. I've heard it earlier. And also to raise enough money for the inaugural mission for a charity that performed corrective facial surgery on children born with cleft lip and cleft palate deficiencies, deformities. And we raised enough, the broader team of South Africans that supported us. David and I just did the long yards for 84 children to smile for the first time. Our coach, Professor Tim Noakes, our coach, he had this to say prior to our departing for China to the South African media.
I think it's highly improbable that they'll be able to complete the event for the reason that they're trying to run a marathon every day for more than 100 days. In fact, the last time that something like this was attempted was when Scott walked to the South Pole with his team in 1911, 1912. And they man-hauled for 10 hours a day for 159 days. And we calculated that they expended about 1 million calories, and that, to our knowledge, is the greatest performance ever. The difference here is that these guys are actually running, and they're running on a difficult surface, and they're running at different altitudes and different environmental conditions. So in my opinion, this is physically impossible. The probability that something will happen during the event that will prevent them from completing is so high that the probability of their success is essentially zero.
He was wrong. I love saying that bit. But in fairness to Tim, he did not know at that juncture that we had taken on a charity. Because when you are helping other people, less fortunate than yourself, or nature, it gets you through the tough days as well. It's a win-win. So when I told Tim about the charity, he was asked to please write the foreword for my book, which he's graciously done. And in that foreword, when asked how come we proved him wrong, he says, and I quote, "The physical challenge in an event like this is not where the outcome is decided, for the body is merely a slave to the mind." And I absolutely agree with that. And he continues by saying, "And if the mind can be convinced of the value of the task, there is little that is impossible." This is little Michelle. She's from the town of Craddock in the Eastern Cape. When I first met her, she couldn't look at me. She felt ugly. She looked ugly on the outside. That's not a pleasant sight. She didn't have a roof to the top of her mouth that you and I have. You touch the roof of your mouth with your tongue. She couldn't do that. She never went to school because the other kids stoned her, actually, the first time she went to school. She was ostracized. This is the same girl 6 months to the day later. And she has... Thank you. She has performed a little miracle. She gave me a letter months later, and she said, "Thank you for changing my life. I'm going to be a doctor so I can help other children." That's the gift of giving, right there. The choices we make in our lives determine our outcome. That's simple. I mentioned I was the eldest of 5 children. I lost my first brother, Marius, to a heroin overdose 14 years ago. And very tragically, I lost my second brother just over a year ago, also to drugs. Peter, my deceased brother, looked at life very much like this picture in front of you. He would sit in his cave, and the world out there looked too harsh a place for him to venture into. So he escaped. That was his choice. I share this story because there's an upside in tragedy. I have a remaining brother. His name is Mark, Peter's twin. Same family, same parents. I went and got Peter's book, a journal, out of his home when I picked up his frugal belongings. And I read his journal, and in there, an entry 7 years ago, "I hope I don't lose another brother to drugs." And he was referring to Mark, who 7 years ago was in a coma from a heroin overdose in a Johannesburg hospital. Mark came out of that coma, and he chose a different path, like I did when I lay under those stars in the Cedarburg, way back. And Mark took his amazing talent of art, and he now paints murals for hotels, for corporates, but more perhaps significantly, he goes to the rehab centers that he frequented and teaches the addicts to paint. He understands the gift of giving. So the choices we make determine our outcome. I'm no different to my brothers. I've just made different choices to some of them. So when you get to the end of the Great Wall of China, your life has changed. And I think of those children and how much more we can do as human beings. And essentially, I was asked by the media a very strange question. Did I believe in sin? Now, I'm not coming from a religious bias in my answer, with respect to everyone, but for me it was a very simple word. If there is such a thing as sin for me, it's mediocrity. To live a compromised life. There's an amazing definition, ladies and gentlemen, of the word hell. Hell is arriving at the end of your life and meeting the person you could have been. I will not be in that space. If you see the tracksuit of these children, it says on the back of the tracksuit to be number 1. But the word number is abbreviated with a dot. And this is my dot campaign that I invite all of you to be part of. Please. You remove the dot in the number 1 and you read the sentence again. It says to be no one. The significance of a simple dot, you and your life, can have massive, massive effects. Indeed, a single person can change the world. Collectively, if we share the goal and the vision and the dream and we drive it with passion and purpose, we can indeed fix the mess we've made. I say on television, our planet is a dot in the universe. We are just dots on our planet. But if each of us do one thing, we reshape our planet's future. It's way too late. This whole emotional impotency, I'm only one person, I can't do anything. We are obligated as custodians to look after this fragile home. I have a goal, a dream, and that is, through social media, to create a tipping point for this planet of 1 billion people through an app that's being developed by one of my sponsors. And it's free to everyone next year. Please join that dot family. I'd like to leave you with a very simple question. What is your do one thing? What is your dot? Thank you very much for your time.